Good afternoon, everybody. This is the What Can I Do podcast book club. And we are still working on our human rights and liberty section in our education department. And so we today are going to be looking at James Baldwin. James Baldwin has interested me since I was a young teen and barely understood his work, but I've been reading. And now it's time to revisit him in this context. So he was born in 1924. And he died in 1987. It's odd that I was his contemporary because it doesn't seem like that makes sense. But of course, he was considerably older than I. He was born almost 40 years before I was. And he existed in a Paris and in a New York that I'm not sure exists today. He was born in Harlem. He was an American writer and civil rights activist. He was known for his eloquent, searing explorations of race, sexuality, and class. He was born James Arthur Jones. He was the oldest of 9 children. He grew up in poverty with a preacher stepfather. And by age 14, he was a prolific reader, a teenage preacher. And that shaped his rhetorical style. That's interesting. I didn't know about the preacher part. He moved to Paris in 1948 because he felt stifled by American racism. He wanted personal freedom. Note, he wanted not just the liberty of getting the government off his back. He wanted the freedom to think and to write and to feel. He moved to Paris with only $40, which of course is a pittance now. The $40 back then was probably a few $100s for us. Still. He, in 1953, his debut novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain. And then he has an essay collection, Notes of a Native Son, premier essayist on race. So he often dealt with the complexities of being Black, queer, and American. I believe that could be called intersectionality. He had a novel called Giovanni's Room. He returned to America to participate in the civil rights movement and became a close friend of Medgar Evers and Martin Luther King Jr., and he was known for his brilliant public speeches and debated against William Buckley. If that's not an interesting concept, I might have to go listen to that debate. In fact, future curriculum, I would have students listen to that debate and then do some interesting things about it. He passed away from stomach cancer in 1987. So let's see, if he was born in 1924, oh, I see, he wasn't really very old. He was younger than I am now when he died. So he's celebrated for his ability to articulate the emotional and psychological impact of racism. So that's a good beginning. It was recommended to read this first work and look at that for the particular topic, but there's another one that I also want to share some of. So okay, The Fire Next Time. That was the recommended one, so we're going to look at that first. So first, he had a letter that he wrote to his nephew, James. And I have a sneaky suspicion that the format of the letter might tell us more about his feelings, or a different register of talking about his feelings. And here we go. Dear James, I've begun this letter 5 times and torn it up 5 times. I keep seeing your face, which is also the face of your father and my brother. Like him, you are tough, dark, vulnerable, moody, with a very definite tendency to sound truculent because you want no one to think you're soft. So, a tough guy. You may be like your grandfather in this, I don't know, but certainly both you and your father resemble him very much physically. Well, he's dead. He never saw you, and he had a terrible life. He was defeated long before he died because at the bottom of his heart, he really believed that what white people said about him. This is one of the reasons that he became so holy. I'm sure that your father has told you something about all that. Neither you nor your father exhibit any tendency toward holiness. You really are of another era, part of what happened when the Negro left the land and came into what the late E. Franklin Frazier called the cities of destruction. You can only be destroyed by believing that you really are what the white world calls N. I tell you this because I love you, and please don't you ever forget it. I've known both of you all your lives and have carried your daddy in my arms and on my shoulders, kissed and spanked him and watched him learn to walk. I don't know if you've known anybody from that far back, if you've loved anybody that long. First as an infant, then as a child, and then as a man, you gain a strange perspective on time and human pain and effort. Other people cannot see what I see whenever I look into your father's face, for behind your father's face, as it is today, are all those other faces which were his. Let him laugh, and I see a cellar your father does not remember, and a house he does not remember, and I hear in his present laughter his laughter as a child. Let him curse, and I remember him falling down the cellar steps and howling, and I remember with pain his tears which my hand or your grandmother so easily wiped away. But no one's hand can wipe away those tears he sheds invisibly today, which one hears in his laughter and in his speech and in his songs. I know what the world has done to my brother and how narrowly he has survived it. And I know, which is much worse, that this is the crime of which I accuse my country and my countrymen, for which neither I nor time nor history will ever forgive them, and that they have destroyed and are destroying hundreds of thousands of lives and do not know it and do not want to know it. One can be, indeed, one must strive to become tough and philosophical concerning destruction and death, for this is what most of mankind has been best at since we've heard of man. But remember, most of mankind is not all of mankind. But it's not permissible that the authors of devastation should also be innocent. It is the innocence which constitutes the crime. Now, my dear namesake, these innocent and well-meaning people, your countrymen, have caused you to be born under conditions not very far removed from those described for us by Charles Dickens in the London of more than 100 years ago. I hear the chorus of the innocent screaming, "No, this is not true. How bitter you are." I think he's describing fragility. But I'm writing this letter to you to try to tell you something about how to handle them, for most of them do not yet really know that you exist. I know the conditions under which you were born, for I was there. Your countrymen were not there and haven't made it yet. Your grandmother was also there, and no one has ever accused her of being bitter. I suggest that the innocents check with her. She isn't hard to find. Your countrymen don't know that she exists either, though she has been working for them all their lives. Well, you were born, here you came, something like 15 years ago, and though your father and mother and grandmother, looking about on the streets through which they were carrying you, staring at the walls into which they brought you, had every reason to be heavy-hearted, yet they were not. For here you were, Big James, named for me. You were a big baby. I was not. Here you were. Oh, I see. The baby was named Big James because Big James was a baby and James Baldwin was not. Of course, they're both James Baldwin, aren't they? Here you were, to be loved. To be loved, baby, hard at once and forever, to strengthen you against the loveless world. Remember that. I know how black it looks today for you. It looked bad that day, too. Yes, we were trembling. We have not stopped trembling yet. But if we had not loved each other, none of us would have survived. And now you must survive because we love you and for the sake of your children and your children's children. This innocent country, I have a feeling innocence in quote marks at this point, set you down in a ghetto. This innocent country set you down in a ghetto, which in fact it intended that you should perish. Let me spell out precisely what I mean by that, for the heart of the matter is here, and the root of my dispute with my country. You were born where you were born and faced the future that you faced because you were black and for no other reason. The limits of your ambition were thus expected to be set forever. You were born into a society which spelled out with brutal clarity and in as many ways as possible that you were a worthless human being. You were not expected to aspire to excellence. You were expected to make peace with mediocrity. Wherever you have turned, James, in your short time on this earth, you have been told where you could go and what you could do and how you could do it, and where you could live, and whom you could marry. I know your countrymen do not agree with me about this, and I hear them say you exaggerate. They do not know Harlem, and I do. So do you. Take no one's word for anything, including mine, but trust your experience. Know whence you came. If you know whence you came, there is really no limit to where you can go. Bookmark that. Bookmark that. If you know whence you came, there is really no limit to where you can go. Period. Full stop. I said full stop, and now I'm going to go on. The details and symbols of your life have been deliberately constructed to make you believe what white people say about you. Please try to remember that what they believe, as well as what they do and cause you to endure, does not testify to your inferiority, but to their inhumanity and fear. Please try to be clear, dear James, through the storm which rages about your youthful head today, about the reality which lies behind the words acceptance and integration. There is no reason for you to try to become like white people, and there is no basis whatever for their impertinent assumption that they must accept you. White people being default and superior. The really terrible thing, old buddy, is that you must accept them. And I mean that very seriously. You must accept them and accept them with love. This reminds me a bit of Bishop Tutu right here. I don't know if that continues that way, but he seemed to think that there needed to be forgiveness. So we'll see if it goes there. For these innocent people have no other hope. They are in effect. Maybe he does mean they're innocent. They are in effect still trapped in a history which they do not understand, and until they understand it, they cannot be released from it. They've had to believe for many years and for innumerable reasons, that black men are inferior to white men. Many of them indeed know better. But as you will discover, people find it very difficult to act on what they know. To act is to be committed, and to be committed is to be in danger. In this case, I think about our Congress, because that's exactly. To act is to be committed, and to be committed is to be in danger. In this case, the dangers in the minds of most white Americans, the danger in the minds of most white Americans is the loss of their identity. Listen and listen good, because Baldwin's telling us exactly. Try to imagine how you would feel if you woke up one morning to find the sun shining and all the stars aflame. You would be frightened because it's out of the order of nature. Any upheaval in the universe is terrifying because it so profoundly attacks one's sense of one's own reality. Well, the black man has functioned in the white man's world as a fixed star, as an immovable pillar, and as he moves out of his place, heaven and earth are shaken to their foundations. You don't be afraid. I said that it was intended you should perish in the ghetto, perish by never being allowed to go behind the white man's definitions, by never being allowed to spell your proper name. You have, and many of us have, defeated this intention. And by a terrible law, a terrible paradox, those innocents who believe that your imprisonment made them safe are losing their grasp of reality. But these men are your brothers, your lost younger brothers. And if the word integration means anything, this is what it means, that we with love shall force our brothers to see themselves as they are, to cease fleeing from reality and begin to change it. For this is your home, my friend. Do not be driven from it. Great men have done great things here and will again, and we can make America what America must become. It will be hard, James, but you come from sturdy peasant stock, men who picked cotton and dammed rivers and built railroads, and in the teeth of the most terrifying odds achieved an unassailable and monumental... I have to go back because that's too important to mess it up. It will be hard, James, but you come from sturdy peasant stock, men who picked cotton and dammed rivers and built railroads, and in the teeth of the most terrifying odds achieved an unassailable and monumental dignity. The word dignity carries so much here. You come from a long line of great poets, some of the greatest poets since Homer. One of them said, the very time I thought I was lost, my dungeon shook and my chains fell off. You know and I know that the country is celebrating 100 years of freedom. 100 years too soon. We cannot be free until they are free. That's a flip. God bless you, James, and Godspeed, your Uncle James. That was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful letter, too, but a beautiful flip, because he is talking about how we can't be free till they are free, but but the message to white people is you're not going to be free till everyone's free. So I find that rather interesting. There's so much. I think I want to stop here with this one. That was deep and impressive and important, and I don't want to belabor it by going on. I would just say after that, read the book. The discovery of what it means to be an American. I think a second piece from him is in order and might be more interesting right here, because this was a piece in a newspaper, and they showed the newspaper, but then they've written out the text. So, the discovery of what it means to be an American by James Baldwin. It's a complex fate to be an American, Henry James observed, and the principal discovery an American writer makes in Europe is just how complex this fate is. America's history, her aspirations, her peculiar triumphs, her even more peculiar defeats, and her position in the world yesterday and today are all so profoundly and stubbornly unique that the very word America remains a new, almost completely undefined, and extremely controversial proper noun. No one in the world seems to know exactly what it describes, not even we motley millions who call ourselves Americans. I left America because I doubted my ability to survive the fury of the color problem here. Sometimes I still do. I wanted to prevent myself from becoming merely a Negro, or even merely a Negro writer. I wanted to find out in what way the specialness of my experience could be made to connect me with other people instead of dividing me from them. I was as isolated from Negroes as I was from whites, which is what happens when a Negro begins at bottom to believe what white people say about him. In my necessity to find the terms on which my experience could be related to that of others, Negroes and whites, writers and non-writers, I proved to my astonishment to be as American as any Texas GI. And I found my experience was shared by every American writer I knew in Paris. Like me, they had been divorced from their origins, and it turned out to make very little difference that the origins of white Americans were European and mine were African. They were no more at home in Europe than I was. The fact that I was the son of a slave and they were the sons of freemen meant less by the time we confronted each other on European soil than the fact that we were both searching for our separate identities. Along with that, maybe read some experiences of American Black people who have gone to Africa and found out the differences between Africans and African Americans or American Blacks, the cultural differences and how they felt, good and bad. It's an interesting topic. When we had found these, I guess that's our separate identities. We seem to be saying, oh, why then would we no longer need to cling to the shame and bitterness which had divided us? I guess that's not a question, it was a statement. Sorry. When we had found these, we seemed to be saying, why then we would no longer need to cling to the shame and bitterness which had divided us so long. It became clear in Europe, as it had never been here, that we knew more about each other than any European ever could. And it also became clear that no matter where our fathers had been born or what they had endured, the fact of Europe had formed us both, was part of our identity and part of our inheritance. I had been in Paris a couple of years before any of this became clear to me. When it did, I, like many a writer before me, upon the discovery that his props have all been knocked out from under him, suffered a species of breakdown and was carried off to the mountains of Switzerland. There in that alabaster landscape, armed with 2 Bessie Smith records and a typewriter, I began to try to recreate the life that I had first known as a child and from which I had spent so many years in flight. It was Bessie Smith, through her tone and cadence, who helped me to dig back to the way I remember. Back to the way I myself must have spoken when I was a pickaninny. Not a word I would have said on my own, but remember I'm reading, and remember the things I had heard and seen and felt. I had buried them very deep. I'd never listened to Bessie Smith in America in the same way that for years I would not touch watermelon. But in Europe, she helped to reconcile me to being an N. This is hard for me to read, and I feel like it's not mine, and so I want to do it honor because he needs to be heard. I do not think I could have made this reconciliation here. Once I was able to accept my role as distinguished, I must say, for my place in the extraordinary drama which is America, I was released from the illusion that I hated America. The story of what can happen to an American Negro writer in Europe simply illustrates in some relief what can happen to any American writer there. It's not meant, of course, to imply that it happens to them all, for Europe can be very crippling too. And anyway, a writer, when he's made his first breakthrough, has simply won a crucial skirmish in a dangerous, unending, and unpredictable battle. Still, the breakthrough is important, and the point is that an American writer, in order to achieve it, very often has to leave this country. If the American writer in Europe, if the American writer in Europe is released, first of all, from the necessity of apologizing for himself, it's not until he's released from the habit of flexing his muscles and proving he's just a regular guy that he realizes how crippling this habit has been. It's not necessary for him there to pretend to be something he's not, for the artist does not encounter in Europe the same suspicion he encounters here. So I feel like he's saying that in Europe he could unmask. He could be his actual self. He didn't have to posture to be this American man in some way. Whatever the Europeans may actually think of artists, they have killed enough of them off by now to know they are as real and as persistent as rain, snow, taxes, or businessmen. Of course, the reason for Europe's comparative clarity concerning the different functions of men in society is that European society has always been divided into classes in a way that American society never has been, overtly. A European writer considers himself to be part of an old and honorable tradition of intellectual activity, of letters, and his choice of a vocation does not cause him any uneasy wonder as to whether or not it will cost him all his friends. But this tradition does not exist in America. On the contrary, we have a very deep-seated distrust of real intellectual effort, probably because we suspect that it will destroy, as I hope it does, the myth of America to which we cling so desperately. An American writer fights his way to one of the lowest rungs on the American social ladder by means of pure bullheadedness and an indescribable series of odd jobs. He probably has been a regular fellow for much of his adult life. Oh. That was charming. Well, we'll have to cut, of course, here, but I managed to close everything. Yeah, closed all my tabs. Which, if I can't, oh, and it won't open them all. So I'm going to stop here. I think we're good. Despite my tech glitch, I'll fix that issue here shortly. In the meanwhile, let's do a bit of a summary. What did we find out about James Baldwin? We found out that James Baldwin writes from a very personal perspective, very autobiographical in these two pieces, and emotionally connected. Writing to his nephew was, of course, a slightly different register, but you could tell it was the same guy, the same experience, the same lived experience he's pointing to. He sounds disappointed, disillusioned, with an edge of bitterness, and he's willing to give us something. He's willing to give us something that we can't always get in contemporary discussions because of something that some people have called black fatigue. They're really tired of explaining it to us, guys. They're tired. They're tired. Like, oh, who was it that said it? Was it Mandela? Was it? I can't tell you that I'm 100% sure of my memory, but it was in our book club. They don't want to explain that they're human anymore. They're done. They're done with that. Of course they're human. Of course they feel. Of course all the same universal human markers apply. Of course the melanin in their skin doesn't make any difference. Of course they have their own cultures and their own norms. Of course they should be looked at as individuals and as members of their own group and not judged for that same membership. Of course people should be sensitive to the intersectionality and what vulnerabilities there are. How is that still controversial? So that's what I'm going to wrap up. James Baldwin, like Fannie Lou Hamer, they're adding this flavor. If you can't see their humanity when you hear them and listen, hear them or read them or listen to me share what I'm hearing, where's your humanity?